Hi to everyone who is live here in the Zoom room with us. It's so good to spend this hour with you. And I have to say, this couldn't be a better day to do a sci-fi session, honestly. This couldn't be a better day to go into the future together. My name is Felix. I have the honor to host you live from Nuremberg, live from Germany. And I would love to know where you are out there in the world. Um, as you may see in my background, I'm actually joining you from the world of sci-fi already. This is not the Horizon studio that you usually see. This is artwork from our guest, David Alabo, Afrofuturist cityscape behind me. And where are you joining us from? We already have 3 continents in the room. Canada is here, Calgary. Thank you for joining us. And of course, the US is here, San Francisco and Germany. Thank you all for taking the time. Lithuania, wow. Thank you all for taking the time to be here, to spend time together on Future Horizons. It's great to be together in the space that we hold for you, the futurists, the foresight practitioners, the researchers, the storytellers, everyone who futures as a verb. All year round, every month, we hold this space for 75 minutes so you can ask your questions, enjoy live music and mindfulness, and connect with one another. I have the honor to also host you live on LinkedIn. Hi, for the first part of the hour. Breakout rooms will happen after that, top of the hour. So I encourage you to leave your camera on if you're here in a Zoom room, share your presence. And of course, you can also switch on captions here on Zoom. Or even translated captions. AI makes it possible. And enjoy this session together. If you're on LinkedIn right now and you're thinking, I want to meet this community, come over, hop over on Zoom. The RSVP should be there for you. Our topic today on Dubai Future Horizons is challenging the status quo. Can sci-fi save us? What a question. We will enjoy sci-fi art together, like you see it in my background, and we will discuss what does Afrofuturism and Latin American and Middle Eastern sci-fi have in common? How can the Global South claim its role in shaping the future through storytelling and imagination? And what is the role of sci-fi finding solutions for global challenges such as AI, sustainability, and biotech, and all these things, all these big things that we're surrounding ourselves every day and thinking, is this the present or is this the future we're living in? It's so complex, but today we're venturing out into far worlds. And this session is actually taking place on the occasion of Echoes of Tomorrow, a sci-fi short story competition by Dubai Future Forum. It's the first time the forum is doing something like this. Submission deadline is August 30th. Link is in the chat for you to be a part of this and to submit your own writing. And the winners will be at Dubai Future Forum on November 19 and 20 at the Museum of the Future in Dubai, together with many of you. And here from the team is Alwood Al-Falazi, research analyst at Dubai Future Foundation. Alwood, it's so good to have you with us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Felix, for the introduction. I am really excited to be here to talk about the competition.
Yes, it's great what you guys are doing. How's it going so far? And why did you actually launch this sci-fi short story competition?
So the reason why we launched it is last year during the forum, we had a creative writing for futures workshop. And during that workshop, I had the privilege to not only support, but I was able to participate. And by the end of the workshop, participants were sharing their stories. And what I realized is that majority of their stories had a few things in common. Firstly, they had a very positive future and outlook. And second, it was sci-fi themed. And third, it was human-centric. So seeing these talented stories, and also when we were brainstorming ideas for this year's forum, we realized that forum was quite international. And last year, we had participants coming from around 100 countries. And so we wanted to continue that global interaction and have a platform to encourage future thinking through storytelling.
Great. And as you can see in the chat, Kenya, Peru, Calgary, Canada, France, UAE, it's amazing. Azerbaijan, this is a global community, Nigeria, that is coming together here. And you can all be a part of sharing your stories. And one more question, Avud, because you're here today. How sci-fi is the forum going to be? I mean, this is coined as the largest gathering of futurists around the world. How sci-fi is this year edition going to be?
So the reason why we focused on sci-fi this year is, firstly, we want people to have a positive outlook. So when we hear sci-fi, when we see sci-fi movies, it's kind of like doom and gloom. But can we break that stereotype? Can we use sci-fi to ignite our imagination and build a very euphoric future? And like the question that we've asked earlier, can sci-fi save us? So we want people to tap into their creativity and share their stories of the future.
Wow, I'm so excited for this. To me, it felt like the United Nations of Foresight, walking through the hallways with people from 100 countries. You just said it. Thank you, Awud, for being here, for starting this competition, and for everybody who hasn't heard of it. Click on the link in the chat, check out the dubaifuture.ae website, and be a part of it. And Awud, we'll see you later for the closing of the show. For now, I'm going to say hi to our guests today. And I have to say, I had never had a cooler background on any show, thanks to David Alabo, who is at home in Accra, Ghana, and joining us live from Paris today, visual artist and art director. David, so good to have you on the show. Welcome to Horizons.
Hi, Felix. Thank you for having me. I mean, it's such a pleasure to be here again in another forum. I was privileged to attend last year's Dubai Futures Forum. And so this is sort of a natural extension. And, I love anything sci-fi. I think a lot of us here can agree in how it's sort of shaped our whole lives, and especially for me as a visual artist, an Afrofuturist, sci-fi has been an integral part to my journey. So I'm happy to be here, happy to talk about my work and also answer any questions. So yeah,
thank you, David. And Seshani actually just put it in the chat. Zishan, sorry, grew up on sci-fi. It helped shape my direction in education and career in general. How cool is that? Just like you, David. And exactly. I have to say, David, I'll just claim this background and use it for use it forever. From Lima, Peru, I would like to welcome the next guest, editor and writer César Santivañez. César, you not only have a beautiful name, you also did beautiful work that we'll look at in a second. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Felix. Hi, David. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you here and talking about sci-fi, sci-fi for the global south. I think that science fiction is kind of a mindset. You have to overcome the political issues of our region. So that's why it's very important to have these spaces for discuss about that.
Yes, I can't wait for more from you about that, challenging everything around you, challenging the existing narratives and the way I grew up with Western sci-fi from the global South. Thank you, César. And now I have the special honor to welcome somebody who is a science communicator, a creator, and the Dean of Dubai Future Academy, and also an esteemed podcaster, Dr. Mohamed Qasem. Mohamed, it's so good to have you on the show today. Welcome to Horizons.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be with you guys, and it's very, very exciting, especially talking about sci-fi and science. This is exactly what I do, and I enjoy it a lot. But I'm going to go later on, maybe, against César, saying there's got to be some negativity in there. There's got to be dystopia as well. So I'm happy with it. Let's go with that.
I love that. Yes, this is why we do this. We have real talks. We have hard, big questions. And before we dive in, I'm going to use this moment to crash Zoom. Because Zoom is not exactly sci-fi. It has been with us at least over the last 4 years for most of us. And what the amazing thing about Zoom is that you can just ask everyone to switch on their microphones and even their cameras if it's comfortable and join us all on stage. So Liz, our producer, is now going to switch off the spotlights here. And if you want to switch on your camera, you can just join us on stage right now, and you can do a quick test of your microphones for the breakouts that are later. So wherever you are, say hi in your favorite language to our guests, to each other. Don't be shy. Let's crash Zoom. Hi, Horizons. Hi out there. Let's hear it. Welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
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 Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Those were at least 5 continents saying hi to each other. Thank you. To kick off our conversation today, I want to thank you all first for submitting so many amazing questions when signing up to be in the Zoom room with us. We were literally drowning in really tough questions, and I'll try to post some to our guests today. And to begin with, though, I'm going to turn this on you all and tap into your recent memory, because we want to know from you, when you think about sci-fi right now, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Let us know. We're going to build a beautiful word cloud on Menti together, and we would love to hear from you. The link is going to come up in the chat. You can also just pull out your phone like I am doing right now and scan that QR code to land into the word cloud on Menti, and you can let us know what comes to mind first when you think about science fiction. We would love to hear that. We would love to hear from you what you feel about this topic, what you feel about maybe having seen or heard recently, what you maybe have going around in your mind, an invention you have heard of. Let us know what sci-fi means to you, and let us know what comes up for you when you hear that word. There's already a lot going on in our beautiful Horizons cloud here, from Yoda to Out of Reach to dreams to flying to space to gremlins to possibility to out of reach. How cool is that? And I'm going to ask our guests to join us back on stage here while the word cloud is flowing and growing. Mohamed Qasem, David Alabo, César Santivañez, let us begin the conversation on Horizons today. And I want to start by saying that there is something hopeful when I look at all of you from 3 continents here, having grown up with sci-fi, being into sci-fi, building worlds. There's something more than the Western, the Hollywood sci-fi that I grew up with. So César, I'm actually going to start with you and ask you first, because in your home country of Peru, there's not only the cumbia that we just listened to, there's a beautiful saying that I learned from you. You walk into the future backwards. I had to sit with this for a while. You walk into the future backwards. You're not actually able to see it, that saying says. And your sci-fi writing and your work with the Future Fiction magazine in Spanish is inspired by that, is inspired by the indigenous people of your country and their narratives, by the punk culture of your country. So there's a lot going on there in the saying, and there's a lot of hope and a lot of utopia in what you do. So César, just an easy question to open us up here. How can sci-fi save us?
Well, okay, it's a tricky question because I think it all begins with our conception of times. We tend to visualize time as a straight line, and in that order of things, we think that past is something you have to overcome, because turning back into the past is bad. So I think we have to change that mindset, and we have to recognize that there are valuable knowledge in the past. The past is not just something you have to overcome. And I think that's for a beginning. And I think that somehow we've been trained by years and years, like 40 years of dystopia. We have trained to think that a pessimistic writer is smarter than an optimistic one. So being pessimistic is seen like a more cool writer. I enjoy dystopia. I'm a fan of dystopias, but I think also that utopia is way more challenging, because utopia forces you to take some actions, to draw a path, because you must build utopia. That's more active genre. I think that's because utopia is maybe, for me, is way more interesting than dystopia. With dystopia, you just let you go. and let others determine your future. The big corporations, well, all things cyberpunk. But yeah, I think that utopia is a mindset, but a more realistic utopia. From utopia is not this naive objective. I grew up in the late 80s, 90s scene, underground scene in my country. We were getting through a very complicated political issues. We have like kind of a civil war going on in the whole country. So I was into this underground scene where all we have to face reality was the do-it-yourself thing. So that's what punk is all about. And there's a thing I always say, that being optimistic is the more punk thing you can do in these days. So yeah, I think that's the thing.
Being optimistic is the most punk thing you can do. Mohamed, I'm gonna challenge you right now, because you already said it in the beginning. You said no sci-fi without a little bit of negativity. So you just heard it's the most punk thing is to be an optimist. What do you say now?
I wish that was the truth. Otherwise, our cinemas would be filled with movies that are utopian. We know that dystopian movies capture the imagination more. You have to have an arc to the story. You have to have a Joseph Campbell's sort of narrative, where there is adversity, where you go through pain, you go through emotions, and then maybe you reach at a certain point where utopia is at the very end. But then again, the successful shows are the ones that end with a utopic ending, and then they pull you in for the next season so that you can come in for more. So people are hinged on dystopian stories because suffering is part of human stories, and I think you cannot discount that. You cannot expect people to think about happiness without taking action to reach that happiness. And usually taking action requires a lot of pain, and that pain is important for the journey. So I cannot agree with this particular look, if you tell me there's a completely utopian story out there in the movie theater, I'll tell you I'll book somewhere else. I'm not going to go to this show. So, but if you tell me that there is an arc to the story, yes, take me over there. Let's go together. Let's have fun.
Do you want to respond, Cesar?
And yes, I think that as Mohamed said, utopia is not comfortable. I think that the interesting about utopia is that we must assume the part of things getting lost in the process. And well, here, for example, in Latin America, we're building some speech about, for example, eco justice, and we know that things get lost. And yes, utopia is painful, but utopia is also a process. It's not a finish line. It's always a process, and it involves pain and conflict. Yeah.
So interesting that you're saying that basically the utopian stories are the one that are more work to consume, to take on, to accept, than the dystopian, because we're so used to those. And maybe Mohamed, there's a point to that. I want to take it over to David, because David, your work, and I have it in my background, it's all over the world. You have exhibitions in Europe. You just had some over the last few months. You just said that you were in Dubai talking about your work. And I have to say, when I look at, for example, the boy with the world on his head, I see beauty. I see the color schemes, the Afrofuturism that you represent. I see your two homes, Ghana and Morocco. I see Western, Northern Africa. I see the fact that you grew up around the world as the son of a diplomat, taking in globalization. I see all of that in your work after reading about you and hearing from you. But I wonder how you compare your lens, your Afrofuturist lens, with what Cesar and what Mohamed just shared. how do you compare yours with theirs?
Yeah, I feel like, hello everybody, David here again. I feel that I can only answer it from my perspective, and I think a lot of us can only share what we know from our perspective. And mine has been a very sort of multicultural upbringing. And I think for me, when I think about sci-fi, I think about imagination. I think about how we can envision ourselves and recontextualize our existence in a different context. And I think the power of sci-fi in all its forms, media, film, music, is sort of a bridge between imagination and reality. When we can imagine ourselves in different contexts, not only does it liberate us, but it also gives us hope. So for the word cloud, I put up hope because I agree with Cesar when we do say being an optimist is punk. It is so easy to lie in negativity, even though, like Mohammed said, it is essential and it is the balance to dystopianism. But it is an act of rebellion to be positive, to imagine futures that empower us and give us a sense of freedom, because we do unfortunately exist in a world that actively does try to suppress our imagination. So that's where I come from. That's where my thinking lies when I practice, when I create worlds. And yeah, I use the visual medium particularly because it allows me to not only like I said before, reimagine myself, but it also allows me to learn more and dig deeper into where I come from, because for me to imagine what could be, I have to study what already has happened. So that's the motif, that's the thinking, that's the essence of my practice.
Do you want to respond to that, Mohammed? Wait, I think your mic's still off. So let's try this again. Mohammed, your turn. Wait a second.
I'm not sure whether David is in the middle or in the right or in the left. He seems to have a completely different sort of image of what he's trying to do with science fiction. I'm still hanging on to the utopian image. And I mean, think about this. We've been telling stories all throughout mankind's history. If you want to invent a new way of telling a story, it would have to kind of build on what we already have. Just like science. Science is not built on thin air. It's not built on no infrastructure at the bottom. There's always something that you can build on. Even the changes that we do, even when Einstein comes and says, here's a new theory, it's that theory that is built on top of the shoulders of giants before him, the shoulders of scientific giants that came before him. So I think it's the same thing. If you want to change the narrative, the way you do utopian stories, you have to be the Einstein of storytelling in this new age where you can tell a story in a way that's never been told before without any dystopia. And then you tell people the story and then you capture their imaginations and you can still drive interest in what you're doing. So if you do that, you'll probably win the Nobel Prize of storytelling. So let's hope this happens. Maybe David can create a new way of telling a story in this utopian way. Well, we'll see. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you asked me where I stand. I don't think it's a binary choice. You can't really be fixed on utopia or dystopia because there is no strict definition. So that's why I can't pick a side. But I think that adds to your point where it's the yin to the yang. It's necessary for each to exist. And what we do is try to understand both sides of the spectrum. And whatever we create always is in some essence, a mix of both sides of the story.
And Mohammed, I wanted to actually dive into your work for a moment because you just said science and science fiction, there's sort of a push and pull, and you use it both. You are not only the dean of the Dubai Future Academy, you're also a science communicator. I said that. You're a creator, as it's called now, a podcaster. You have a following of millions in the Arabic world, and you use sci-fi, you told me preparing for the session, specifically to explain science. And we're going to screen share one of your videos that shows how you use cartoon, graphic novel kind of visualizations to get people interested in science. So please let us know, why do you do that? Why do you use sci-fi to explain to millions of people what's happening in science? Why do you use that?
So we know the effect of storytelling. It is captivating. It gets people's interest. And I mean, there's a workshop that I do in Saudi Arabia, in Ithra, that I tell people how to write a story or create a podcast that is successful. And the way you do that, you start with a good story. And it doesn't have to be always this sort of way of telling stories that I'm doing right now, but this is my method of telling a story, where I would either tell, so on the podcast, because it's only audio, I tell it, but then I create images, and then I tell the story on my YouTube channel or in my presentations in front of crowds. So stories grab us. In history of mankind, there was no writing, there was no books, there were no books, there were no digital media. There was no way to communicate and transfer knowledge from generation to generation except through stories. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence that shows that people used to tell stories and used to create dances and things like that would transfer the knowledge from one generation to the next. And why stories in particular? It's because people can hold on to stories extremely well to their chest and then move that to the next generation and so on. But if I tell you facts, bullet points and things like that, you'll probably forget these. But if I put them into a narrative and explain them to you in a lengthy way with an arc, you will probably ingest the story and enjoy it, and then you can remember it and tell it to others, and then the story keeps on going. So I think this is sort of something that is ingrained in our DNA, and we kept this sort of way of accepting information and taking it in until now, all over human history. Until today, we are telling stories and we're enjoying them. And this is something I wanted to do in my podcast, to draw in people so that they can pay attention to the podcast, and then I would tell them what science does. And then I tie the two things together. So I write a science fiction story that includes elements of science, and then I go to the science and talk about the science fiction story that ties into it.
Okay. And would you say that it's fair, or I'm going to ask differently, how right is it to say that sci-fi can actually save us, the topic of our session today? What do you think?
Look, I don't know whether it can save us. It is definitely helping. Look, human beings have huge imaginations. The same brain that creates the theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, and then it creates string theories and parallel universes and multi-worlds and all of these things. It's that same brain that is capable of creating stories as well, fictional stories, science fictional stories. So some of them drive each other, by the way. I mean, take, for example, X Prize. X Prize created a $10 million prize for anyone who would create the device that was used on Star Trek to diagnose lots of diseases in a human body, right? So people saw Star Trek, they got excited, and they became scientists. Then they started creating these devices, and then an X Prize came and said, we'll give you $10 million if you can create this many diagnoses within a small device. So science fiction is pushing science, and then people who are in science and enjoy it, they'll say, wait a minute, maybe I should take that and turn it into a story and push the boundaries of science and go further into the future. H.G. Wells did that, for example. I mean, he created lots of predictions in his stories about the future, the tank, the nuclear bomb. Time. Oh my goodness, my favorite genre of all time. Time itself. I love movies with time travel. So H.G. Wells created these wonderful stories that depended on science, and he stretched them, and he stretched the imaginations of people. And now we have scientists that are, just hanging onto these ideas, and they're trying to build them, and maybe they can create science out of it. So these two things are well connected, and they affect each other. They push on each other.
Fantastic. The push and pull of science and science fiction. Thank you for explaining that so beautifully. And I'm going to address what Isabel and Stephen and others are talking about in the chat. The utopias that are always difficult because we're so diverse. So someone's utopia is somebody else's dystopia. Stephen and Isabel were referring to that. And they were referring to a term that one of our community members, Monica Bilskite, actually is a proprietor of, protopia. So there's now three. There is the utopia, the dystopia, and the protopia. And this also came up in your questions that you submitted. By the way, you can submit questions during the show at any time. The Menti code is right here. We will look at these questions together, not only questions that have been submitted while you signed up. You can also ask live. Just use Menti so we have them all in one place. You can vote on them, and you can be a part of submitting and selecting the questions. Sarah from the US actually asked when signing up. Now, we have utopia. Theoretically, utopia is kind of solving all of our problems. I think Isabel put it in the chat. Everything is amazing, right? Then there's dystopia. We talked about this binary thing. Everything falling into dysfunction, dire straits for everybody. And then there's this protopia concept, a term for sort of incremental progress over a long period of time. That's at least how I understood it. And César, I want to go back to you because when you look at these three terms, Sarah was actually asking, is there maybe an alternative to these three terms? We talked about utopia versus dystopia right now. The community said, how about protopia? But maybe, César, you say there's something else. You're the writer, you're the editor. So I'm going to ask you, is there maybe an alternative to that? Do you want to take us into a completely different direction?
Yeah, before answering that question, I'm with Mohamed when he said that we must stand in the shadow of giants for building new stories. But there's an interesting thing. Latin America giants has been kept silent for Aristotelic way of telling stories. So we now take for granted that there's a way to tell stories based on that 4th century guy named Aristotle, that he was a genius, but we have our own giants too, and we want to stand in that shoulders. But that giants kept being invisibilized by modernity. So that's interesting. Yeah. About protopia, yeah, I think that it's complicated thing because protopia talks about an incremental day-to-day growth, and I think well, maybe the way to grow is degrow. Maybe utopia can feel a little dystopian sometimes, and we have to be aware that incremental growth has to let things go, and has to give us. We must let, for example, the comfort culture. We now understand technology as comfort. We must let it go to build some more sustainable world, for example. And yeah, protopia, yes, I think that's the right term, but we also have to be aware that protopia is not that easy, that maybe grow, it involves losing things.
And would you say that the ancient wisdom that you dive into for a lot of your sci-fi stories is one of degrowth?
Yeah, because it came from culture that is based on the territory. Now we've been forced by colonization to think on political boundaries, but our people has grow communities through the communication with the land, with the earth, with the natural resources. But I think that's why Latin American politics is so complex right now, because we've been forced to think on a political system that is not made for us. So the government doesn't understand the people from the Andes or from the Amazon. The people from the Amazon live in big little communities with his own language, his own cultures. But we have a colonized language, the Spanish, and most of us don't speak Quechua, for example. We don't understand some philosophical concept because there was an Andean philosophy, but it's also remained silent due to the colonization. So we have our own thinkers, but we have to learn story from other perspective. And yeah, we have to claim our future back.
Maybe Quechua-topia could be a thing that you create, and we'll talk about in a future session here. I wanted to go to David again, because David, there's one of your artworks, and I'm going to switch my background here for a moment, that looks a lot more uncomfortable than the one I had in my background before. This one is, you know, when you follow the video along, it gets, it looks like it's getting hotter and even, you know, less comfortable, the whole environment. It deals a lot with the sculptures that you do, the sort of digital art that you're doing. And of course, what's running here is not a beautiful animal. It's sort of what's left of it. So when you hear this conversation and you think about how the Global South can claim this, as we were just trying to get to, right? Getting away from the utopia, dystopia binary, maybe even going beyond protopia. What do you think? How can the Global South sort of shape the future through storytelling? You think about that a lot, David. Otherwise, I wouldn't put this heavy question on you.
No, it's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, so I think it's great that you showed this piece. I believe the title is Echoes of Extinction, which I think is a great sort of flip side to some of my more my works that sort of explore an idealized or a fictional reality where people that look like me are thriving and liberated. But at the same time, you do have to think about how can we use sci-fi? How can we use our imagination? How can we use our output, our creative output, to tackle and sort of maybe not tackle in a grand sense, but try to understand some of the issues that affect us across the world, you know? So I think thinking about how we can enhance or extend the definition of what the future means, I believe we have to first understand this as fact that not everybody has the same vision of the future, you know? It's not a singular idea, you know? And me as an artist, my work is a direct sort of testament or a direct challenge to this idea of a singular, maybe more Western-oriented idea of what sci-fi even looks like, you know? So I think understanding that we can never have one future together just because of the fact of how diverse we are is sort of an appreciation of that fact rather than trying to dilute it. You know, we embrace the fact that we're all different, you know, and there's beauty in that. There's power in sharing stories, sharing ideas, finding similarities, but also working through the differences, you know. And I just love that quote from Cesar and where he's from, talking about walking into the future backwards, because even in where I'm from in West Africa and Ghana, before we were divided by borders, by the colonial oppressors, there was a very strong sort of understanding of time not being a linear thing. You know, it's something that is cyclical, and even that very understanding can separate you from someone else's idea, which doesn't diminish yours or the other person's. It's just a different way of seeing the world. So I think there's a balance. You know, you can't just pick a side. There are no sides, is what I'm trying to say. So I can't come up with a catchy name for my version of utopia or dystopia or whatever. But I think that sort of understanding and acceptance of how multifaceted, multicultural, and how unique we each are is a good stepping point to including everybody, you know, in this in our own ideas of the future. So that's sort of my thinking. That's my understanding of the issue.
It's so fascinating, the similarities here. So first of all, Oliver put in the chat, the Western sci-fi is often the single hero. And Mohamed was talking about that in the beginning, the hero's journey, right? But both in what you just shared, David, and what César was talking about, the sort of ancient understanding, it's community. There is not a single individual. This is something you share. And you just talked about walking into future backwards. And Wakani was so kind to share in the chat just one word, Sankofa. So I was like, what is happening? So I just Googled it while you were talking. Sankofa is a word from Ghana, actually, David, from one of your home countries, that literally means go back and get it. And there is a mythical bird, a symbol for Sankofa, that is flying forward with its head turned backwards. It's exactly what César was just talking about. So
exactly,
it's crazy.
yeah. No, I mean, like, again, this is what happens when you try to you do the exercise of imagining a future based on where you're from. You know, I think a big part of my work is studying symbology, studying ancient practices, ancient traditions, because, you know, they've lived a lot of our history as a human species, you know, so we cannot put that aside. You know, there's a lot of wisdom and there's a lot of power you can gain in terms of how you imagine what could be for your people through understanding what has often been hidden from us, you know, or not hidden, but diluted or sometimes covered away, you know, because sometimes we are so focused on what Hollywood or what the Western media tells us we should imagine our future, you know. So I think thank you, Wakani, for Sankofa. That's looking for that word, but yeah, that's just a testament to how these ideas have always been there. You know, I think we're just only realizing that we need it.
Oh, man. Thank you for sharing that. And actually, there was a question submitted from the community up front from Rob from the US, who asked, okay, if we go away from this individualistic way of science fiction storytelling to a more communal, a more community way, is there maybe even a way to write sci-fi together? So César, I guess I'm going to ask you, have you ever tried, Rob was wondering, collaborative sci-fi storytelling, like multiple contributors working on one story together?
Yes. Actually, I'm working on a project now that it's not about even written sci-fi, it's oral sci-fi, because there are a bunch of people here in the country that communicates with oral narrations. So one of my dreams for the next year maybe is build a communal sci-fi story to be told through oral narrations. The written is not our original way to tell stories was not written, was oral tradition. So we have to recapture that human connection. Yeah. And I do comic books too, so that's what's collaborative.
Any non-Western book recommendations? Julia is just asking in the chat. So please, if you have any recommendations for stories, please put them in the chat. And also, we have, of course, the chance to submit questions through Menti. Liz, our producer, is going to share with us one question that just came in. What are your thoughts on some more recent genres, like solar punk, hope punk, or climate-fi or cli-fi? I think this is the next question, Liz, that came up. And because David was like saying, it's so hard to find labels, and we're always looking for labels. We always want to going back to Mohammed, we want to tell a story, we want to create an arc. So if we want to create something that goes beyond utopia, dystopia, protopia today, is this one of those? Does any of you have thoughts on these more recent genres? Any of you three, Mohammed?
Actually, I've never heard of these. They're quite interesting, to be honest. Never heard of solar punk. Look, I'm a sci-fi guy. I watch movies, I read books, but I've never heard of these terms before. I've never heard of protopia as well. So it's quite interesting to have this new terminology. Maybe this is the way going forward, is finding these new terms and new stories to build. But since I can't answer this question, I would like to push back both on David and on Cesar's
That's what we're
points.
here for.
Yeah, so first, I want to respond to having Cesar's point as to having a community of heroes that advance the story of sci-fi. In science, we know today if one person dies in a horrific incident around the world, then the whole world just goes crazy over the story, and you see the entire news networks tell the story over and over again. But if you see thousands of people dying in a single bomb, they all become just a simple number. So stories, the reason people, writers write stories with a single individual as a hero is because of how we're wired to view that person, how we can see ourselves through that one single person, maybe wanting to be that person or avoiding to be that antagonist if we choose to. So this is one issue with Cesar's story, and I'm dying to see what he's writing. Maybe if he writes it, and I want to see if it actually works. It's very interesting. The second thing with David, it's about being diverse. Now, I understand being diverse because the brain, every single brain on earth is based on how you culturally infuse information into it, and we're born. If I was born in Africa, I'd be an African, even if I have a different complexion than being darker. If an African is born in Kuwait, he'll be a Kuwaiti, even if he's dark. His behavior, his demeanor, everything is that, and that's why we think, yeah, we should be diverse. But then, when it comes to science fiction in particular, science fiction is something that always looks at science as the father figure trying to advance the story, right? But science is very accurate and very exact, and science in China and Japan and Africa, it's all the same. It's exactly the same thing. It never changes. So if you want to build stories, it's going to be really hard to change the sci-fi element of the science to something that is related to Africa or Kuwait or UAE or anywhere else in the world. So this is the only thing that I feel that you need to tackle in order for you to come up with, look, ultimately, if you do this sort of thing, and if you try to go way beyond science, what science is doing, it turns into fantasy. And then it turns into magic and things like that, where it's now out of the genre of science fiction. So these are the things I'm thinking about while David and Cesar were talking about their point of views of diversity and also the other point.
Yeah, I mean, I think you raise a good point. I would say that the whole point of it is, I know you come from a science background, and I do agree that there is some universality to science in terms of how we go about it, but I think we can increase, or we can expand our definition of what science is. I think that again, to your point, I do think it's important to go beyond science to imagine, because then you're not limited by this you're not stuck in the limitations of it, because yeah, you do have to imagine something that doesn't seem bound by the laws of reality. And then you can sort of reverse engineer your way back into something that does hold some more concrete scientific value, you know? So I think they work in tandem with each other. They don't maybe work in the same universe, but they can influence each other in different ways. So, I mean, I would always encourage people to, you know, go beyond the laws of reality when you're imagining, you know.
César, I saw you before when it came to solar punk and whole punk cli-fi unmuting, and I think it ties in neatly with the fact that several community members, Carlos from Peru, Surprise from the UAE, Karl-Heinz from Germany, a lot of people submitted questions beforehand and said, how is the sci-fi role in solutions for global challenges, right? AI, you know, climate crisis, biotechnology, and maybe this ties in with what we were about to say, César. Is this what solar punk, what whole punk, what cli-fi is there for? Is this what you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, actually, yes. I'm way into solar punk. I love solar punk genre. It's a genre that, as a term, first appeared in Brazil in an anthology called Solar Punk, and 2013, edited by Gerson Lodio Ribeiro. And then the term went to United States, and then there were published anthologies like Solar Punk Summers, Solar Punk Winters, or Ecotopia, and things like that. They're very cool stories. But I think the genre is still finding its way, because there's a maybe a risk that seeing utopia as a narration without conflict, and as a narrator, I think that's awful. But we must understand the conflict in searching this utopia. And I think that solar punk from the global south, it's going to be a thing in the next year, because we have to cope with, I don't know, environmental leaders getting killed every year by tens. We have to cope with the drug industry claiming the lands for these destructive drug lords, and burning the forests for planting. Yeah, and that's a real problems. And that's solar punk too. So solar punk can be a very complicated issue. And I turning back to the collective hero, to the community. There's a very good story, actually, and maybe one of the most famous stories here in South America is a comic book called El Eternauta, the Eternaut. It's from Argentina, and it says that the only valid hero is the community. And now here in Latin America, we see protests every month, and that's the collectivity doing its works. We know about protests. That's the thing we do in Latin America, but that's the people getting through and changing politics for real.
Yes.
There's no
and I just shared
hero. Yeah.
I just shared the Eternauta in the chat. Such an amazing comic. Oliver just posted, who is in Germany and actually read that already. And wow, I feel you so much when you say the Global South has to tackle all these problems at a much more dramatic level than the Global North. So, hey, you should actually not only read, listen, watch our sci-fi because we are breaking out of the colonized stereotypical narratives. No, it's because we have to face and solve most of the biggest problems that exist in the world right now. Very strong statement for you. And I went back to the Afrofuturist cityscape for the last question to you before we open the breakout rooms here, because there was a fascinating question from Jessica submitted from the US, who said, what's the next in sci-fi? And I was like, all right, that's a perfect class question. What's something in sci-fi, you guys, that you see emerging around the corner that we can't see yet? We talked a little bit about cli-fi, about solar punk, about things that are just emerging, but maybe there's something else. David, I'm gonna start with you. Is there something you see on the horizon that we can't see yet?
That's
Caught you there.
got me there. Something we see in the future. Oh, can I get back to you on that one?
Absolutely. I
I need
love
to
that
think a little
answer.
bit about that.
We have the breakout rooms in the meantime, so we'll come to that at the end. Nigerians in Space might be one to keep in mind. Just Oliver shares here another work that's interesting to check out. And César, anything that you see on the horizon before we open the breakout rooms that will get people excited to continue the conversation here?
Yeah, I think that in the near future, we will see more collaboration between sci-fi storytelling and foresight and future studies, because it's a way to anticipate scenarios and communicate science to the readers, to the everyday readers. So, yeah, I think that's the way sci-fi will evolve in the next years.
Fantastic. Wow, you're reaching out to this whole community that's in the room here. I have to say, I have one last question for you all, because we never want to leave without sharing signals. This is futuring for everyone, everybody. And I would love to know if you have any sort of sci-fi story, book, movie, podcast, research, article that you want to recommend that we should leave each other with today. This is a crowd of incredible wisdom. So let's get our wisdom together. What should we read? What should we check out? What should we watch? What should we listen to? Put it in the chat right now. And I'm going to put it to our guests. David, you said, can I get back to you with this? Of course you can. David, any recommendation from you? Anything that's around the corner that you want to share for closing us off today?
The question you put before, I think it was a great question, tough question, but I think from my perspective, and I was talking to my group about it, and I think the way in which we consume media and the forms in which we consume stories and content is going to evolve, you know. I do think we are so many people on this planet that you can't outright say there's something new on the horizon, but the way in which we interpret and create stories, I think, are going to be different given the trajectory of technology. And I always say that we have to be more than just active consumers of technology. You know, we have to be part of it. We have to create, and we have to, you know, be involved in the production of these stories. So that's my point of view.
Wow. Okay, mic drop. Hard to follow up on this. Mohamed, what would you like to leave us with today?
Can I add to what David just said now? And I was talking in the other room about this, about storytelling in the future. And it's not just about what stories would come, because as science advances, people would have to advance with it and they will tell new stories. But what I was telling them is that in the near future with AI, you're watching through your Vision Pro or some other VR a movie, and as your feelings change, the AI will create a new story following that path. Can you imagine, like, you're happy and then the AI looks at your face and says, wow, let me just drive the story into the more happiness and get more out of this person, or take him in another direction, and suddenly the movie, the narrative, everything changes through the AI. There's a new story for every single person. No two people will have the same story using the VR. I mean, I have the VR right now, the Apple Vision Pro, and guys, I tell you something, it's amazing. I mean, as I'm watching, I put my finger in front of the screen where the dinosaurs come out. There's a butterfly that comes and lands on my finger. So if my finger is here, it'll land here. If it's here, it'll land here. Imagine the same kind of technology, but it's watching your facial expressions, and it follows this and changes the story as you go along. If you're in awe of the space, it just makes it even grander and makes you feel much more involved in it, and so on and so forth. So this is a future that's going to happen soon.
And if it's going to see you, it's going to know, Mohamed, we're going to throw a little bit of dystopian in there just so he likes it. Thank you for this amazing vision, Mohamed. César, what would you like to leave us with?
Yeah, I have to recommend some non-traditional sci-fi work that is a mural actually. It's a wall that is located in the north of Peru, and it's from 500 AC. It's called The Revolt of the Objects.
The
Take a
Revolt
look
of
at
the
that.
Objects.
Yes, it's our first sci-fi story. Yeah,
Wow.
it's really amazing. Yeah.
And it's how old, you said?
It's from the year 500 AC.
Amazing. Okay. So we just went from AI to Apple Vision Pro to the year 500 in just a minute. That's how powerful our guests are today. Thank you so much to the three of you from 3 different continents. I'm going to throw in an old school recommendation. An analysis of 200 sci-fi movies over the last 7 years just came out on pudding.cool, a visualization studio from New York. Highly recommend checking this out. Link is in the chat. 200 sci-fi movies, 70 years. That can't save you. But there is something that can save you, because Echoes of Tomorrow is still going. The sci-fi short story writing competition is open until August 20th. You can submit your story. I just learned Afrofuturism. Somebody put that in the chat. Maybe you want to submit a story like that. We had Solarpunk today. We had Protopia. We had Catchuatopia. We, of course, had Cli-Fi. We had old school dystopia and utopia and protopia in there. And finally, register for the Dubai Future Forum. Sign up is open. That's it from me. I'm Felix. We're the Remote Daily team and proudly putting together this amazing gathering with this fantastic community of foresight practitioners every month. Proudly responsible for that together with the Dubai Future Foundation. This is your final song live from Atlanta from DJ Hourglass. And while you're starting to put your volumes up, let's switch on our microphones one last time and say goodbye in whatever language you prefer. This was Dubai Future Horizons. This is your final song. Auf Wiedersehen. Bye-bye. Good to see you.